Trustee Vela,
Here.
Trustee Vettis.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe we're unanimous. We went from 2 to 7 almost immediately. Trustee Hoffman, could you help us with the flag salute, please?
Sure. Put your right hand over your heart. Already begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under all, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Trustee Hoffman. Approval of agenda, any dissension? I think there's another word. What's the other word? I like the word dissent.
Objection.
Oh, there you go. Steve Edis always has the good words.
Hey, you should know that in your line of work.
Well, dissent, right? Dissent. Oh no, you know what? You're right, Trustee Vettis. Objection is used more, but dissent sounds better. Lupe, are there any requests to address the board regarding open session agenda matters?
No, sir, no one signed up.
All right, we move on then to board annual self-evaluation. It's my pleasure to introduce the president of ACCT, Mr. Ji-Hang Lee, who all of you received the packet via email of information. Mr. Lee is going to go over the agenda, and let's see, we have about 29 persons who are present for this. Mr. Lee, take it over. It's all yours.
Okay. Well, good morning to all of you and all the attendees, and thank you so much, Board President Buena, for allowing me to present the board assessment for the LA Community College District. Crystal, do you have a copy of the PowerPoint and you can share that?
No, I didn't receive a copy.
Okay. Mr. Board President, is that, do you want me to send that, or can you send that to her? Well, no, I have it. I can send it off to her, so she has it. Okay. Sorry about that.
It's still 9 a.m. on the West Coast.
I feel
We're not moving as fast here.
Yes, I feel you. I cannot actually type anymore for some unknown reason.
I will.
Let me do this. Chancellor Rodriguez, can I send this to you? And then if you could forward on to Crystal, I only have her Zoom email.
To Crystal or to?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Just send it over. We'll get it in right now.
Yeah,
I
just sent it over
with
to
an
you.
introduction, and then we'll get this thing loaded up.
Okay, perfect. I just sent it off to you. Well, thank you so much for your, it's always a technical glitch. First off, thank you again for allowing to present the board self-assessment to all of you. We obviously want to do a couple things. Number one, I want to note and thank the LA Community College District for its continued membership in the Association of Community College Trustees. Your dues to our associations are critical to supporting the advocacy and education roles of our association and our continued work. Number two, it was great to see a number of you in sunny San Diego last October for our annual meeting, which was our first in-person event. I am hopeful it will be sunny and not snowy in Washington, D.C. in time for our National Legislative Summit, and I hopefully will see some of you there. It will be an in-person event. We're excited to have speakers such as Secretary Cardona and Secretary Walsh of Departments of Education, Departments of Labor, respectively, who will be participating in our legislative conference. And for those of you who are attending the Community College League event next week, I will also be in attendance. So if you see me, come please say hi, and I look forward to talking to you and seeing all of you. It is a treat to see many of you in person because we have only seen each other, many of us, only in these pixelated boxes. And I can tell you, I'm a little sick and tired of the boxes. So with that, we can kind of walk through the board assessment. Hopefully Crystal has it and we can share that documentation and have that shared.
One moment, please.
Okay, perfect, not a problem. So there are, as I guess I could just get going and the slide will show up. One of the things that we always ask and boards always ask is, why do a board assessment? A board assessment is a critical component to understanding what the board is doing and to do an assessment of the priorities and the progress that is being made within the institutions. So we have a handbook. It's called Trusteeship in Community Colleges. It is our most recent iteration of some of the guidance that we provide to boards. And board self-assessment is an effective tool to evaluate former policies with the board and to continually assess and improve performance. It is a process. Whoops, this is the different PowerPoint I sent you to, Guadalupe. This is the one that we'll do the next.
Okay, we weren't, we
Okay.
didn't know that, so.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
So we're on next slide, please. Okay, so this process is meant to gauge all the board members. And first and foremost, I want to congratulate all the board. You had 100% participation on this assessment. And I know we sent this out near the Christmas time period. And I know that's a very busy season for many of us. And I want to congratulate all of you for your time and effort to making sure that this assessment was done. We also, the assessment is aimed to establish an understanding of the board, what they expect from themselves, and how to be effective. And it summarizes some of the accomplishments and characteristics to be proud of and provides an opportunity for the board to identify goals for improvement. And I want that last bullet point to be something in mind as we progress through this evaluation. I think it's critical for us to kind of have that conversation and thought in mind. The next slide, please. Now, for your internal purposes, this is the language that we found in your board manual relative to your board assessments. And this board does an annual process, it conducts it, and it meets each year to determine the board officers meet to talk about the instrument, but also the process of the evaluation shall be presented to the board. So part of this is just not doing the exercise. Part of this process is also going through the exercise, looking at the results, and then having some conversations about these results. And we're excited to participate. In addition to this exercise today, I have asked your board president to even talk a little bit about some of the emerging needs. There's a presentation that I've been giving to some of our institutions to kind of have a forward-thinking process about what's happening in this country and what it means for enrollment and workforce programs and other things within your institutions. Next slide, please. Okay, the critical components to this evaluation are the following. There are two parts to the self-assessment. The first part deals with standard practices of the board. So internal processes, relationships to the CEO and stakeholders, board structure and board evaluation, board operations, and your relationships with yourselves. Part two assesses how the board is progressing on its own goals, okay? And I think that is one area that we will talk a little bit about. And just as a reminder, especially when you're looking through this assessment and evaluation, part two especially, or that include priorities that might be multi-year priorities, things that will require the district multiple years to finish. And I think those are things to keep in mind as you take a look at this. Just because the score might be a little bit lower just means that it's still a policy that's in process and it has not been completed or is close to being completed. Slide 5, okay. So averages across 2022. All averages, and these are just averages, and we want to provide this information to you, is 3.26. The overall average for part 1 is 3.67. It's a little bit down from 2021, and the overall average for part 2 is 3.0. As with all things, a 1 and a 5, a couple 1s, a couple 5s kind of skews the numbers a little bit. And just as a reminder, it's a statistical component. A 1 can reduce, even though the board might be all 4s, a 1 does reduce the total average across the board. So this is just that type of reminder. So when you take a look at this, and the evaluation that the board president sent to all of you does have some notes for you in terms of like the actual votes for each of the questions that were included in the board self-assessment. Next slide. As we examine part 1, we're going to be viewing the governance policy direction monitoring component of the board. And then also on the CEO side, it's the administration, execution, and implementation, and how they bridge together. And that's the important component of part 1, is what is the board's relationship with each other, activities, policies, and then how is the board and CEO relationship going? Okay, next slide, please. So part 1 includes these following buckets. And there are 25 questions in total in part 1. The following sections are included in category 1: board roles and responsibilities, board ethics, board chancellor relationships, board district and student relationships, and board operations and board operations. So as you take a look at these numbers, we talked a little bit about some of the data that we had on the front end, that we saw some slippage from 2021 to 2022. But we broke this down a little bit in those 5 categories of how you see some of the slippage within each of these category areas. As you take a look at the broader evaluation, though, one thing that I want to note for the board itself, take a look at the 2018 or 2019 data in addition to the 2021 and 2022 data. It really shows significant progress for this board across all of these 25 questions. And I think on these 5 buckets, and I think that's something that I would applaud this board for doing this self-evaluation process, being honest about the process and seeing growth through this process. So that's something, as you go back in time and start looking through this data points, I want you to kind of flag that. So in terms of the highest category area of part 1, next slide, please, sorry. We just want to flag this specific section, which is regards board student relationships and the average ratings. We saw significant numbers, even in the midst of a pandemic. The board has supported and through its policies and has worked with its chancellor and your presidents to ensure that they're, yes.
Oh, just a quick question for the sake of the trustees. Would you prefer them to write down their questions and ask at a certain point, or for them to raise their hand and or to just verbalize a question as what is your preference? We didn't agree.
Yeah, actually, if they just want to ask questions, I'm happy to answer questions as we get going. I don't want us to go back slides. So my preference is that they just speak up.
Okay, I just want to make sure that the trustees know that please don't wait for me to call on you, because some of you I may not see on the screen. So I just have a question on number 16 with regard to what is the purple?
Sorry, what's that again? What was
the purple?
Yes, so question 16 for us in that chart is board members are knowledgeable about district needs and expectations. And I think, here's the thing about COVID and the pandemic that we have lived in the last 2 years. I know that in Los Angeles, you have been in lockdown in various stages, and your ability to meet with all your stakeholders, to meet with all your students has been hampered a little bit. And I think this is kind of a reflection of that. The specific question is kind of a reflection of that, is that people haven't been able to see their students, shake hands, visit, the student center, walk through various components of your institutions and the halls of of your institutions. And I think that's really more of that response to that as opposed to the broader components, because I think one of the things that you do in your policy section, which is part 2, you have identified critical needs, such as basic needs, transportation, housing. So you do know collectively on a broad scale that these are the things that your students especially need. But it's not necessarily just a quote unquote, I just think that's that's how I would respond to that. In terms of we just haven't had that ability to do that. But I do think as we hopefully come out of Omicron, that this is a question especially will increase over time. Okay, so just in terms of for all of you, 14 in this section, 14 is board members show support for students and employee achievements. 15 is board members attend. Yes. Oh, sorry. Board members attend at various events and programs. 16 was that question I just mentioned. 17 is the board builds a positive image of the district. And 18 is the board advocates district interests at the state and national agency level. And many of these are very high. Yes, Board President.
Number 16, what's the question again?
The board members are knowledgeable about the district needs and expectations.
You know, I just like to offer an alternative, and that may be that board members don't feel it, right? Because, you know, as I'm looking at these questions, board members are understanding, and there might be an issue there, and that's for, you know, as we're developing our goals, you know, I just want to make sure that you know, we may clearly understand, and we may need to delve into that as well for more.
Yes, and I would say that's actually a perfect you know, component to the part 2, because, or at the end of I think the end of part 1, because I think there was questions about having additional data about some of these needs. And I think those are, that you are right on in terms of knowledgeable to, you know, having a complete understanding of what's going on, especially within your individual institutions within the district. So that's category 1, part 1. This is the highest levels. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, so this is what we have done is provided a breakdown of each of the trustees for this highest section to kind of see where we might see some growth in providing additional information back to all of you. And I'm just kind of showcasing where all these responses were. So I'm just going to leave this here for a second, and then we'll continue on.
Mr. Lee,
Yes.
pardon me
Absolutely.
to interrupt members of the board. Good morning. I think I wanted to point out, if I'm not mistaken, the student trustee also responded to this survey. It looks like there are 8 responses. So,
Correct. There are 8 responses.
So I believe the student trustee, I'd ask the board to keep that in mind.
Oh, thank you, Chancellor. That's very important.
All right, we'll go on to the next slide, slide number 10 for all of you. Okay, some of the items that are highest on this list in section 1, this is part 1, excuse me, of your evaluation, and this is the board operations. Number 13 was the board keeps the chancellor informed of constituent concerns. Board members show support for student employee achievements. Board members attend district programs and events. The board advocates on behalf of the district at the state and national level. That I do know because I see you at our legislative summit. I see you in California for the LEAD meeting. The board builds a positive image, and that there are sufficient funds that are allocated for board member participation and professional development. I think those are all great, and it shows that there's broad support for the board in conducting its role as, especially on the financial side, for supporting conferences and travel to the Sacramento and to Washington, D.C. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide. Okay, some of the accomplishments. And we're going to spend some time in this section and we'll kind of go through some of these individual questions. The next slide, please. And I want you all on the board to take a look at your data that we provided for the 18 self-assessment, the 21 assessment, and the 22 assessment, okay? Because all of this is a painting. So you can't just look at a painting in one section, you have to kind of look at the whole picture, so to speak. So these are areas that have had significant growth over time. And I want you to use 2018 kind of as the benchmark. Like what have you seen in terms of growth in terms of the board assessment? So number 3 was the board ensures that all board members follow board policies and the policy manual is up to date. So what you have seen is in 2018, we went from a 3.0 to today, which is in the 3.7. In terms of board ethics, board members uphold confidentiality and maintain trust in their role as a board member. In 2018, it was 2.29. Today, it's 4.3. So what we have seen almost a doubling in that section, which is the question number 8. In terms of the board CEO relationship, the board creates an environment to support the chancellor's success. So we had a 3.14 in 2018. Now we're almost a whole point above, which is now at 4.13. The board keeps the chancellor informed of constituent concerns, and you've seen almost a whole point jump from 3.86 to now, which is a 4.86. The board district relationships, 15 was a 4.0 in 18, and now it's a 4.57. The board builds a positive image of the district. That was a 2.83 in 18, and now it's a 4.5 in 2022. So you see significant jumping in certain areas of the board self-assessment in these critical areas of roles of the board. 22 is the board meetings are conducted in a manner that the purposes are achieved effectively and efficiently. It was a 2.71 in 18, now it's a 3.5. And sufficient funds are allocated for the board. That was a 3.71 in 18, now it is a 4.5 in 2022. So you'll see the differences on the right, that's the differences between 21 and 22, but I would also in context showcase that where you were in 2018 to now in 2022, you have seen significant growth. And I think that's something that I would applaud the leadership, the board leadership, and you, Mr. Chair, for your role in this effort. The next slide. Okay. So as we think about some of these pieces, there were also some comments that we would want to showcase as part of this evaluation, because each of the sections allowed individuals to fill out and ask any, provide a comment back. So in section, I believe in questions 1 through 5. Let me just recheck, sorry. Yes, questions 1 through 5, there was a comment that said, I think from year to year, depending on board leadership, we go from having a clear understanding of our role and then slip into a gray area of getting to involve in the day-to-day operations. By and large, we do okay, but slip out from time to time. And I would say to, one of the things and the critical role of the board leadership is to create a succession planning for the board leadership. That is the board chair, the board president needs to work with the board vice president. I believe you all have a board second vice president. The board has a secretary treasurer. Having a clear and, creating within your own policies, having an educational component to ensuring that the vice president is able to take over for the board president, and in each rung on the leadership train, that everybody understands their role, and they also understand, especially when we get to part 2 of this evaluation, that they understand what the board has been working on and ensuring that there's continuity within leadership. And I think that's something that's important. Other things that are such as are the responsibilities of your chair, clearly stated. And an effective chair creates a strong board and strong board CEO team. And that these are all things that we outline in our trustee handbook. And we encourage all of you to have a copy and reference it if you need to at some point in time. But I think this is one question that we always tell our membership to be aware of. We do have boards where our board chairs don't switch annually or switch every other year. But one of the things that we do is to really provide some educational training on ensuring that the board leadership team, it runs in concert. In terms of the ethics, there was a question, which is also, I believe, in questions 5 through 10, which was, we may speak with one voice, but not adequately debate. We speak with one voice, but do not honestly debate issues. Other considerations for these two comments that we would encourage the board to think about is, effective boards deliberate in many voices, and at the end of the day, when a decision is made, they speak with one voice. And I think that is one area where some boards have some difficulty, in so much that, especially for our elected boards, they're elected to participate and be part of the process and be voices for their constituents. That is their role in terms of how they got elected. But once you serve on a board, you support the decision of the whole, which is the board, and sometimes your voice doesn't somehow feel heard if the decision isn't necessarily the decision that you wanted. But we always effectively tell boards the most effective way forward is the board speak. Once the board votes and speaks, everyone should be supporting the role of that decision of the board. Okay, next slide, please. Happy to answer any questions as we get going, if there are any from the board. Board CEO team, some questions. As a board, we could do a better job of respecting the chancellor's role as a link between board and staff. This is something that we always tell all of our boards is something that's important. The board should provide. The board has one employee, which is your chancellor. And as an employee, you should provide the environment and culture so that your CEO can flourish. Questions to think about is, what is your board and CEO's understanding of their respective roles and responsibilities? And what other steps can you take to ensure that the board and CEO have shared purpose and priorities for the college? And that is part of your priority process and the priorities that the board lays out, and especially in guiding and supporting the chancellor in leading that effort. Board operations and education. Some board members regularly attend conferences, trainings, webinars. As a board member, we should set an expectation and goal for each board member so they can have 100% participation. I also would like staff to give us a heads up on major issues more in advance, and staff as needed for the board. For us as an organization, we always tell colleges education of the board around critical issues, professional development is a critical component of being a trustee of a college. And so in terms of these broader questions, I think the board should be thinking about what type of additional information is needed for the board to carry out its priorities, and also to help guide the institutions with the chancellor. So these are, and that might be from speakers, creating a speaker forum. If you need additional information from the chancellor and the administrative team, providing that as an opportunity for feedback. Attending conferences, I believe, are important because it is professional development. Understanding what's going on in the country and not just being secular to your own community is quite important through this process. Next slide, please. Some of the challenges. These are the challenges that are in part 1, so we'll go through that. Okay. Lowest averages that were rated in category 1, part 1 is the board roles and responsibilities. So we had those questions that were in questions 1 through 5. They are 3.5, all the 3.71 was a high on question number 3, and then 3.0 on question number 5. So some of these questions, if you turn the next slide, the averages were 3.33. So I'll go through some of these questions that were included in this section so you guys have some familiarity. So number 1 is the board adopts policies and guide the administration of the district and monitors compliance, but leaves the day-to-day operations of the district to the chancellor. That was a 3.5. So you'll see a number of 5s, a couple 3s, and a 1. And that is, I always note, the 1s and the 5s also, skewed numbers a little bit. Number 2 was the board allows sufficient time to study and discussion before adopting policy recommendations. Number 3, ensuring that all board members follow board policies and the policy manual is up to date. Number 4 is board understands its fiduciary oversight role, the budget and the budget process, and the financial health of the district. And number 5 is creates policies based on data to improve effectiveness. So if you, I think Guadalupe, you're in charge of the slides. If you turn to 1, you'll see, yes, so you'll see some of the breakdown here, sorry. What I also want to stress as part of this is similar to what I highlighted on the earlier section. Take a look at the benchmarking that existed in 18 and to 2022 today. So the questions 1 through 5 were, we started at 2.71, we went to 3.5. We went from 2.29, we're now at 3.13. 2.57, we're at 3.38. We're at 2.57, now we're at 3. And I think, especially in that first section, it really showcases that you have made progress as a board through all of these processes. And I think, a couple of things like question number 2, for an example, you did see a significant decline. And I think part of this is, and I think also for number 4, the pandemic has caused a significant amount of peculiarities to this process, virtual meetings and being able to, I can tell you as the president and CEO of our association, we're just inundated with emails and mail and all sorts of stuff. And so being able to compartmentalize all this information can be a lot. And sometimes when you go through the process of attending a physical board meeting, going through your board book, reading all this information, it loses a little bit of luster when you get a board packet and it's in an Adobe PDF or a board document and you're like, oh my God, I got to read this again. And it's so for me, I'm a Gen Xer. I like paper to my detriment and to the trees out there. But so this is something that I would just note for all of you. Additional items. Oh yes, Trustee Hoffman, great to see you.
Good to see you too, Jihang, and congratulations again.
Thanks.
I do have a question. I'll be really quick. I don't remember in the past if we included the student trustee in our board self-evaluation. So I'm wondering, we're comparing years to year, how the data might be skewed because in the past we had 7 responses, now we have 8. Does that make a big difference? I mean, I think it's great that we included our student trustee. However, I don't know when we compare how that messes with the data.
Yes. So one of the things that I encourage you to do as part of the evaluation process, and this is a great question because we don't identify, this is an anonymous survey, so we don't identify, like, I don't know if trustee 1, for an example, is a student trustee. It's the first trustee that filled out the form, and it's the early bird is you're identified as trustee 1. But what we did do within the evaluation component is you get to see some of these results, and you'll see, for an example, if you go to slide 17, Guadalupe. Oh, go backward, sorry. So you'll see on these slides, for example, like, even if, I'm just gonna say this is a hypothetical, so don't use this as verbatim. Even if the student trustee, let's say, voted number 1 on, and she was he or she was trustee number 5, the other trustees still supported, there was a number of 3s, there was 4 3s and 3 5s. And then even when you start looking and delving into, for example, on question number 5, you had the student trustee could have been a 1 on that, and there was still 2 additional 1s. So I think this is just kind of an illustrative process where one outlier vote can skew the numbers, but if there's congregating, there might be something for the board to assess in terms of additional information and support. And that was all hypothetical because I don't know who was who. And it's not in alphabetical order either.
I wanted to sort of fine tune the comment as well. And certainly your explanation and response is perfectly acceptable, because obviously we're looking at sort of the congregating of numbers. But the one challenge with the student trustees, they're not part of a closed session experience where there's a lot more depth and explanation. So certainly, the response and the congregating is perfectly fine there, but it does impact a little bit of the year conversations. And I would actually say that in these where, like, for example, where there's sort of the 5 and the 1, when you have people scoring those areas, you see the widest differences, right? And as opposed to some that are closest, where if there's 3, 4, 5, those seem to be more similar in terms of perspective, as opposed to the far reaches of 1 to 5. But I do think with the student trustee not being able to participate in some of those closed session, some of the ones that have the extra information per risk to the district, certainly does have an impact on deliberation and overall perspective of information being delivered to them. So, but your explanation is certainly acceptable for me.
Yeah, well, and that's also very true, because for the most part, student trustees don't vote on, for example, personnel matters and other information that comes into closed session. So, well, thank you, Steve, for that information feedback. Additional questions before we move on to slide 18. I think it's the next slide. Go back, okay. Can we go back to slide 18 real quick? So just to highlight, look at where you were in 18, look at where you are in 2022. All of this is the same thing, a painting, where you were and what type of growth you have made as an organization. I will note that one area that there has seen slippage from the 2018 number to 2022 is question number 11 as a highlighted item. It deals with board sets clear expectations for the chancellor. That was 3.86 in 18. It is now 3.25. So that's something that the board internally should be thinking about as you go forward through this calendar year, and it's clear, outlining clear expectations for your board. And also it goes in line with some of the questions from 21 and 2023, 21 and 23, excuse me, I'm talking about 2023. And that's the board sets goals and priorities aligned with its mission. That was a 3.14, now it's a 3. The board is knowledgeable about the district's educational programs and services. That was a 3.17, now it is a 3. So some items for this board to think about as it sets forth its own board priorities for the forthcoming year. Okay. Right, next slide, please. We are now delving into part 2, which is the board strategic goals and priorities. This reflects the board goals that were discussed in July 2021. A couple of caveats to this. Number one, these board goals are multi-year and may need to be revised and adjusted over time. And the board should evaluate itself on the progress, not necessarily the completion, because some of these items may not be completed and may not be completed within at least this calendar year or fiscal year, but it may take some period of time. So I want all of these items to be in, these notes to be in your mind as we evaluate this process. As a note, all of our lowest rated items in this assessment did come from part 2. And I think that is a reflection of the fact that many of these priorities are not completed or are in the process of being completed. And I think those are things that the board should keep in mind as we start looking at this evaluation. Okay, next slide, please. So here are some of the category averages over the course of all of these questions. Now, we did ask a number of questions to all of you. So when you take a look at this documentation, these are the buckets that were provided to each of you. And there were a number of questions in each of these sections. So there is right sizing, there's foundations, district service center, district organizational chart, land development acquisition, teaching effectiveness, strengthening understanding of board, addressing student basic needs, student housing partnerships, greater equity and inclusion, growing enrollment, administrative and faculty hiring, and COVID response. And I believe that's also EOC and racial justice. Okay, so as again, each of these sections were part 2, you do see a significant difference than part 1 in terms of the averages for each of these scores. Okay, and I want to keep in mind that some of these priorities are still in process and being worked on. I believe in your board documentations from the July 21 meeting, where you went through some of these priorities, the administration provided you an update on many of these priorities and whether or not things were completed through this process. And you should keep that in mind as we talk through this process. Okay. Yes.
I just, the other way to look at it is that the board, kind of understands, and the board, it may be just a very accurate reflection of where they're at with the information that they received. And that it may be that simple.
It could be that simple too, correct. But I think one of the things, and it might be critical as you develop your policies, is to identify which policies and priorities of the board, especially in part 2 of this evaluative assessment, which the board thinks is a short-term policy solution, what is a more longer-term policy solution, so that they can assess properly each of those sections. I think that is something that would be beneficial for all of you, because from outside looking in, each of these sections looks very long-term. Like for an example, housing and student housing partnership seems like a very long-term process. This is a process many of our boards and colleges deal with, and it's not a one-year solution per se. It's a multi-year process from land acquisition to building to coming into and actually getting a building built. Okay. Additional questions, comments? The next slide, please. Okay. So these were the highest priorities within the evaluation of part 2. Okay, so priority 2 was addressing student basic needs, and that dealt with work with LA Metro to establish subsidization and universal student Metro passes. I can congratulate the board and the administration for getting this into action. And I think this is especially important as we as students need transportation, and is something that many of our districts are doing to support their students. I would just note everyone voted 5s, but there were a couple trustees that voted 3. And my response to that is you guys should also give yourselves a pat on the back for making this happen. Priority number 3, creating greater equity and inclusion. And that's answer to number 64 was develop President's Academy in 2020 for district leadership succession. Priority 1, ensuring district sustainability. That was assessing professional development needs of faculty to be effective online. Priority 2, addressing student basic needs, increasing veteran student support. Priority 2 was also another basic needs component, basic needs of students, including better transportation, housing referrals, and availability of childcare. I would note all of that, especially in context of 44. The pandemic obviously has not made easy for childcare opportunities for our students and transportation opportunities. It's been very hit or miss across our colleges, and it has negatively impacted our students. Priority number 3, creating greater equity and inclusion, expand LGBTQ outreach. That's a 3.5. And also another priority 3 was expand undocumented student outreach and API student outreach. And that's a 3.5. So those are some of the high rated marks within section part 2. Next slide, please.
Hang, I have my hand up. Can I ask
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Okay.
point of clarification? So on the first one,
Yes.
work with LA Metro to establish subsidized universal student Metro Pass. You said that most trustees answered a 5. That's, obviously we did that and it was established, and now they have, their pilot program with the Metro Pass. But you did say that a couple trustees put 3. So how do you interpret that? Is that a communication issue? Because it is a fact that we did that, we accomplished that, and thank you for recognizing that that was a great thing, and it was. But can we as a board then do better to communicate to every trustee that that was something we accomplished? Or how does that inform us as we move forward?
I think part of that is, I think it's that what kind of your answer in that the board has to maybe communicate itself as like, we've done this, we worked with the LA Metro system, we were able to successfully do this. And, also it may be that, as the board looks for additional data, it might be helpful to say, X number of students that are now participating as part of this project. That would add a level, of information that a board member might not have. But I do think, especially when we get to priorities, sometimes board members aren't as self-congratulatory, like, you should, this is a significant success. I would say, I wish all my boards, especially in urban areas, were able to get this into place for their students. I think it has significant impact on our students to be able to have transportation. Transportation, especially in many of our communities, is a significant barrier to participation in higher education. Okay. The next slide. Okay. So some of the lowest rated areas as part of this evaluation, and these are things for each, these are the averages for each of these. So item number 34 was identify potential revenue streams. 36, ensure all teaching evaluations are conducted in the 2020-19 as scheduled, engage in college program viability studies, leverage funds to address resource needs, organize current and future administrative positions to maximize oversight, develop multi-use facility, better leverage foundation to address resource needs, increase accountability, clarify reporting lines, increase work efficiencies, enhance student community engagement, potential revenue stream, more emphasis on guided pathways and better integration between workforce programs and transfer programs. And then 61, increase specific metrics to understand trends and shifts in enrollment. I think many of these things are items that the board has set out for itself as board priorities. Board Chair, Mr. President.
Oh, no, I didn't ask it, but
Okay.
I would say that, but were you asking me something, or did you think I was gonna say that?
No, I think I picked you up in the box, so that's why I was.
Oh, okay, but I was thinking it, so now, is that there are some messages here that the board is sending, clearly. So that's what I was thinking, and you caught that in my mind, so I appreciate that.
Yes. And I think many of these is just there's a lot of information in these priority items of the board and policies, goals of the board. So I think that's something that I would note for all of you. It's a lot to retain for a board to have this number of priorities and being able to answer all this. So this is something that I would just note for all of you. Because there's great deal of data that's behind each of these items, from the identification of revenue streams to specific metrics around enrollment shifts, revolves data.
So, Mr. Lee, again, I'm just going to say that it also could reflect an accurate feeling of where they're at. Specifically, for instance, 31, increase accountability, clarify reporting lines, increase work efficiency, right? The question as we move forward with for 2022 is why, right? Why do we have that sense, right? I'm not going to opine on that right now. It's not my place. But number 61, increase specific metrics to understand. 2.13 is a message, right? Whatever that message is. I just don't want to. Because these are very big things, and even though there's a lot, even within 1 5-minute conversation, you can touch on a lot of things, right? So something is occurring that isn't getting through, or maybe something isn't getting through because it's not being said. And so there's several options there, and that's why I think this is, we love the greatest slides, right? And honestly, I forgot, how I voted on any of these. But it is concerning when we see 61 and 30 and 31. It's and for my purposes, I'm highlighting those in my mind and in my document here because it's concerning.
Okay. Yes, and I think the evaluation component for this assessment is a snapshot in time of your board and how do you improve operations and information to the board around its board policies. So all of these on board priorities. And so all of these are obviously board priorities, and how do you work with your chancellor to get additional information and also to show improvement in each of these category areas.
Correct. And so the audience and participants know the snapshot was approximately 2.5 weeks ago, I believe, that we filled it out.
Mm-hmm.
Just so everyone knows, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago there. Correct. So it's relatively real time. So folks have a sense about that. But thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. The next slide. So here's some comments for each of these sections within part 2 that are just kind of illustrative on the foundation questions. Not all college foundations are adequately fundraising. And trustees are never presented with a balance of the foundations and what is being spent with the money. Now, I would just note these are questions that were included or comments were included in each of these sections. So I just we wanted to provide this information back to all of you as you think about this evaluation component. District organizational chart, highly inefficient and ineffective. The land development and acquisitions, we need to do more. Just staying status quo is not the future. Times are different. There is a difference between identifying something versus accomplishing something. Teaching effectiveness. This was the, I think, question. We are told that we should not micromanage, especially over academic issues, by the chancellor and faculty, but we need to make sure that chancellor is doing it. Priority 2, which is the one that Trustee Hoffman mentioned, the Metro Transportation Passes and College Promise have been very successful. And the student housing partnerships need to focus and align with state funding for housing. And also a note is complete failure. And I would just, this is one area where I would note this is probably a multi-year priority, not just a priority that was created in 2021 that will be able to be accomplished. Next slide. Okay. Priority number 3 was creating greater equity inclusion. We still have not put out RFPs for an African-American LGBT outreach. Need better assessment of how COVID pandemic is impacting enrollment, administration and faculty hiring. PC director is much improved, open and willing to communicate. And the COVID response has been difficult because of changing climate, ups and downs, and reopening. So those are some of the comments that each of you, some of you provided within each of these question sections. Okay.
Were there any comments? I retract that. You can cut it out.
Any questions so far as part 2? Okay. So what we're gonna do is, that was part 2. And then there was just some additional open-ended comments that I would like to kind of walk through with the board, if that's okay, Mr. Board President. Okay. The next section, please. Open-ended comments. Okay, so these are some of the questions that each of you provided to us as part of this evaluation. And I think it's important for all of us to kind of go through each of these and find and to kind of grasp what each of the points for each of these comments. Our progressive values and focus on student success, retention, and completion, as well as our commitment to be an anti-racist district with a commitment to social justice. I am pleased with the board's ability to address issues and concerns through substantive discussion and policy review in a timely manner. We've continued to steer the district to accommodate changing academic, social, and financial environment. This past year marked a substantial improvement in working collaboratively. Trustees had an opportunity to explore subject matters where the chancellor supported them. Okay. Item number 2, some of the things that trustees have some concerns about. Our ability to rethink how we are educating students. And I imagine this is going to be an item for all of our community colleges across this country for a number of years. We have not yet come to the realization that remote learning, including synchronous and asynchronous and traditional online, is here to stay, as well as remote services. How can we reimagine our campuses and our campus facilities to serve students of the future? I am concerned about enrollment and recruitment, as the birth rates have gone down and traditional age students are not only the students that we should be trying to recruit, and we haven't changed or adapted our outreach and retention models. And I think, the concerns, especially in these 5 questions that are for all of you, revolves around the teaching and learning and the enrollment issues that many of our colleges are confronting right now and is facing, because obviously COVID-19 has changed the structure of the educational platform, and also has inhibited some of our students from returning to our campuses. Other questions, other concerns. On the next slide, I am also concerned about the course offerings and the programs. We need to ensure that we are working and meeting the needs of a workforce that will largely be working remotely in industries and businesses that we have not yet created training and educational programs. I am concerned about the board's willingness to hold employee groups and departments accountable for the roles in the decline in student enrollment, overall persistence in graduation rates, enrollment, diversity, academic reputation, academic achievement, budget, enrollment productivity. The chancellor is not paying attention to district operations. I would say there is a reoccurring theme throughout these many of these concerns, and that is enrollment, which I will touch upon in my next slide. Okay. Obviously some trends, as I mentioned, COVID fatigue remains to be a significant trend line that we're seeing across all of our colleges. The masks, vaccines, virtual remote learning is still out there. The economy, the state of the economy, the inflation increase has also increased wages for a number of individuals, which has placed some pressure on programs. The enrollment of education within higher education as a sector, community colleges are down again in 2021, fall of 2021. The irony is that we also had a decrease in 2020, but our friends in the four-year public sector and the four-year private sector have also had a significant decline in 2021. And so it is now becoming a broader issue across higher education, not just community colleges. And we're also seeing as a trend line accreditation issues from a number of our community colleges, especially in areas around governance. It is now becoming a top 5 issue on the accreditation list, not just a top 10 issue. Okay. If there aren't additional questions, these are some resources that we just flagged for you as an organization. I hope to see many of you at our legislative summit, which is February 6th to the 9th. We also have a Governance Leadership Institute. This institute is focused, this will be at the Community College of Philadelphia. This institute is actually focused on the board CEO leadership team in creating a good pathline for information and succession planning for the board. We do have a podcast series. Hopefully you'll be able to participate in that, and that's on our website and also through Spotify and also the Google and Apple stores. They're free podcasts. Additional trustee education, advocacy updates, and all of you as trustees and members of our association should have your own ACCT account information to access information and the membership directory. And if you are on a committee, to access committee information. So this is the board self-evaluation. I do want to thank all of you for your participation and the 100% participation for this process. I think it was very, hopefully you found this to be beneficial to all of you. The one additional item that I would just note for all of you that would be beneficial is as the board goes through this evaluation process for 23, it would be especially beneficial for part 2 to kind of keep some of those priorities the same so that you can see the voting results from 22 onward, 21, 22, and 23. Okay, Mr. Board President, I am ready to go through the next PowerPoint if there aren't any additional questions.
Any questions, comments from board members? Did anyone, I just want to make sure that the presentation actually represents what, and I believe it does, so I don't think I'm saying it doesn't, what all of you put in to the evaluation. Is there anything that you think should be stated, at least publicly, that you would like to state? Three, two.
Trustee, real quick, I'm sorry, your question was, I know, I was stuck on mute trying to answer. You mean about the evaluation, or do you mean because the evaluation is obviously because it's all of us individually submitting our scores, so it's each individual understanding and we're compiling. Or is a comment on that, or were you asking to comment? Because certainly the individual perspectives are listed there, and we're not trying to, argue one way or another to change people's perception of things. But I'm just curious what you mean.
Right. No, I'm just asking as individual trustees, is there something that you may have tried to say in the survey that wasn't graphs or just any final comment? That's it.
I'll offer one final comment, and it's really because most of, I think, our trustee evaluations sort of speak to our perspectives, our relationship, how we compile these things with the chancellor. But one of the things about this district, and particularly the nature of being a multi-college district, where there is, college council, there is each school sort of is developing their strategic master plans. We review them in our committees, and sometimes there's really good alignment with the things we talk about, and sometimes it feels like we're in one. Like I'll use the example of student housing. I would say that our board may be more vanguard and more ahead of each of our individual colleges in terms of their structures to assess, to evaluate, to prioritize. And that was the one thing sort of that, and maybe that's how we redefine a goal with how we, because for example, none of our facility master plans identify housing. We've sort of pursued needs assessment at the board level, but the individual colleges have not pursued, sort of developmental programs, and that trigger may be like, and I think that dialogue was started in one of our board committees this past week about, developing a policy. But from a needs perspective, it really hasn't come from the ground up. Right now, this is sort of a top-down conversation to assess. And so I think from the evaluation standpoint, it's not something we've put in the mix over the years of things where the board is ahead of the curve. But at the same time, I'm also really curious where the campus communities may be ahead of us and how we include them in the dialogue, the development of our board goals as well. So, like I said, it's just a general observation. It's one thing I struggled with last year during my presidency, but but just to sort of take it as what's happening at the council level via the presidents and us, who I think spend much more time with the chancellor and the executive team, as opposed to many of the sort of downstream governance structures that exist.
Thank you. Any additional comments from any board members before we move on? 3, 2. Mr. Lee, back to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And as part of this next presentation, one of the discussions that we are having with our community colleges is having a kind of a forthright conversation about what's happening within our institutions and thinking about the next 10 to 20 years of our institutions and what that means, and how colleges are going to grapple with, especially around enrollment, as a number of factors are starting to come into play that are competing against our institutions, and also issues of demographic for our institutions. So Guadalupe, can you post the next PowerPoint, please? Okay. Thank you. This is a picture of our ACCT Senate, which is our voting event. I don't know. I don't think I see one of you, but it is something that it is a sight to behold if you do attend our ACCT membership meeting, where all of our trustees and our voting delegates get to vote on ACCT matters. Next slide. Some emerging needs of our institutions. The next slide. So the first slides will be about enrollment trends, and these are critical, and obviously the open-ended comments, there were a number of questions about the enrollment trends and what's happening within the district. And I want to provide some context to essentially what's happening around enrollment for our institutions, but all of higher education globally. Next slide, please. Okay. Hopefully you'll be able to see some of this. So across all sectors of higher education, we have continued to see slippage in enrollment patterns since 2017, and they continue to grow over time. In the fall of 2020, the message that we heard in 2020 was largely that community college enrollments were the biggest concerning factor, and it obviously was significantly concerning. The two-year public sector dropped by 10.1%. This year in 2021, that percentage drop was 3.4%. But I also would encourage you to look at what has happened in 2021 for the four-year public sector and also the four-year private sector, private nonprofit sector. They saw a decline of 3%, and the private not-for-profits also saw a decline of 1.6%. The proprietary sides on the right-hand side. What that means is that there is significant enrollment loss across all of higher education, not just focused at community colleges as it was in 2020. So a couple of trend lines that we have concerns about in terms of enrollment in higher education: issues around costs, issues around COVID, and issues around student loans, and the messaging around student loans have had a negative impact on higher education for the last 10 or plus years. And that is what we believe is affecting participation in higher education. As you examine some of these next slides, the next slide, please, you'll see national enrollment by institutional sector for 1921. And this is total number of students in each category. I would just note for you, when you do look at the public four-year college system, there are some community colleges that are embedded in that number because of their Carnegie classification. If you offer more than one baccalaureate degree, you get kicked up. So Miami-Dade College, for an example, which is a community college, is inside the four-year public sector. But what you saw here was we were at 4.824 million students in fall of 2020. We are now at 4.662 for fall of 21 for the two-year public sector. What you have seen also is the fall of 2019, we had almost 18 million students in higher education. That is now just barely over 17 million students in higher education. There are a number, yes.
So it just in terms of the public sector, right? So it from 20, what's relevant to us is, and just to be clear, these are national trends.
Correct. I have California trends next. If you're interested.
Well, I just want to make sure that we understand that again, fall 2020, very clear why, right?
Correct.
Then we see a significant drop in the drop, right? That analysis might be, or any observations from you might be helpful, especially as we go into the California data. And it would be helpful from our district to understand, our relationship to that. I'm not looking for that explanation right now, but because our enrollment is, our drip is more than that 3.4, but that's for another day. But I just wanted to focus this on the community colleges. Awesome.
Correct. Yes, and I'll kind of dovetail some of this conversation into the next section of slides, and especially when we're talking about competition within within higher education. But the workplace is providing significant competition for our students right now, and I think that is something that we're I don't think all college leaders are attuned to yet, but it has significant impact on our enrollment, especially amongst men. So just some additional information. The average age, but also average age for part-time students. Fall of 17 was 23 and 27. And then now we are 22 and 26 for our students. Obviously, we do not do graduate and professional programs, so therefore we're not counted in that category. I will note that statistically we are a quote unquote a younger institute. Our community college enrollment is younger than it was in the fall of 17. So there has been some shifting, though our average age is still 26 for the most part. Next slide, please. Okay. So one of the things that as part of the enrollment data, besides just broadly speaking, in terms of the enrollment loss and the loss of enrollment for community colleges since 17, the other thing we wanted to highlight is our continuous slippage of male students attending community colleges. If you take a look at that number of 2.256, to 3.1. You've seen slippage across this board, but you've also seen there are many of our institutions, it's primarily 60-40, 60% women, 40% men, and some of our institutions are even in the 70 and 30% ranges. So that's something that we would like to highlight as some concerns and distress as we think about the kind of the demographics that are going to be attending our institutions going forward. Okay. Next slide. So this is, now what I wanted to do is provide you some data on some other states and kind of how they've gone through. So this is estimated enrollment by the states. This is for all of higher education. So fall enrollment in California was 2.4. And then 2020 went to 2.29, and now in fall of 21, it's 2.199. So you saw almost 100,000 students decline in the state of California, which is 4.3%. Maryland and Massachusetts are near that 4.3%, and Wisconsin has done a little bit better job of maintaining those numbers. In terms of the community college sector, and these are for credit students, obviously. Next slide. This is for the two-year public system. What you see here is in fall of 19, we have, yes?
No.
Okay, sorry. In fall of 19, we had 1.3 million students at the community colleges. And today we are at 1.05 million students within the community college sector. We have seen significant declines. Maryland has experienced relatively the similar in percentage declines. They have gone from 102,000 to 92,000. Massachusetts has a little bit less of a decline, and then Wisconsin with the lowest at 3.3%. Okay. So in that backdrop of enrollment losses within higher education, one of the things that hopefully you are seeing when you walk either in the grocery store or you drive by businesses, the one critical thing that you're seeing over and over and over again is all employers have a sign saying we're hiring. And this, the next slide, please. So in terms of just employment trends that are occurring across this country right now, the unemployment rate is 3.9% nationally. The labor participation rate is 61.9, and that I imagine that those rates might increase once COVID rates go down throughout the country. We are also seeing employers are scrambling to hire people using wage increases and bonuses to recruit students, prospective students. The corresponding job trends result in fewer students attending all of higher education, not just community colleges, but also the typical response to low unemployment rates, generally speaking, is declining community college enrollments. When we had the Great Recession in 2007 and 2008, we had significant increases in enrollment. As the current environment for the economy increases and wages increases, it's just natural to see community college enrollments decline, but that also means colleges need to take a look internally within their programs. So next slide. So employers are competing against each other. So this is just an ad. If you go to Amazon Jobs, they're already showcasing for this. You can earn up to $22 an hour, and you get a signing bonus to work at Amazon. The starting salary nationwide for Amazon is $15 an hour. Next slide. If you want to work at Costco, Costco's minimum wage is $17 an hour, starting salary. So as colleges, especially your workforce training programs, are you doing an evaluation of the wages that exist within those programs? And are they being competitive in the marketplace? Can a student who gets a 6-month, 9-month certificate at your institution, are they making as much as someone who is working at Amazon, someone who can go to Costco? There is an opportunity cost for attending higher education. That 6 months, 9 months of work to get your credential, to get education, is time lost for students. So students, especially if they are given this opportunity to earn $17 an hour, are making decisions around salary and wage benefits to forego higher education. And colleges need to be prepared to have this substantive conversation. It is vital that we, as a sector, have this conversation. Additionally, the federal government is starting a process called gainful employment regulations, where the federal government wants programs to be significantly over poverty line, and it may be forced down upon us for all of our gainful employment programs. So something for us to think about in these two buckets. And then that last slide is, can your workforce programs compete against other employers? What support are you providing to incentivize completion? We do know there's a number of workforce programs, welding for an example, where students, as long as they are able to complete a specific course and able to do something, they can get a job regardless of whether or not they complete a program. That is something that we have heard countlessly, especially in the IT fields and some of the skilled trades. And also, as you think about your programs, think about who are the missing students within your institution and what that impact is for all of you. Okay. And data can help you with that, as with all things. So demographic changes, and this is something for all of you. I don't know if you'll be trustees in 18 years, but these are things that we try to highlight for, because I'm sure Francisco will not be chancellor in 18 years, and I definitely won't be at ACCT in 18 years. But so birth rates in the United States have been declining since 2008, except for 2014. That means this past year in 2021, that we will have the smallest high school graduating class since 2020, which also means that as a community college, you know that the high school graduating class of 2039 will be the smallest that you will have in the last 30 some odd years. So this is something for you all to kind of put to kind of come to grips with, but also this means there are significant opportunity for each of you. This past year, we actually had the lowest US population change. It was only 0.1. Since 1900, this is the lowest increase in the United States. And this is births, immigration, international immigration, and deaths. So think about that in that context. And then obviously the COVID has had a significant impact on all of this. I think many of us, I went to school in the Northeast. We know typically the running joke is that if there's a blizzard, significant blizzard, there will be a baby boom that 9 months, that will occur in 9 months. We did not see that in 2020 and 2021, or we would not have seen that in the start of 2021, which is since we essentially went into shutdown as a country in March of 2020. And then the other thing to flag is the workforce needs will impact going college rates going for years. And I think that goes back to some of the conversation we just had about wages. And if you can, one of our colleges noted to me that their local community Taco Bell was paying $25 an hour with benefits. And it is just a flag that as colleges reassess its CTE programs and workforce training programs, there are benchmarks in play that colleges need to be utilizing to ensure the viability of certain programs. Next slide, please.
Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Is there any data that shows that LA is a minority majority community area region? Is there any data to show anything related to that? Where the unique position?
Well, I think in that I can probably try to find for you, but I think there's some census data, especially for urban areas such as large metropolis areas that we can try to find for you. But I don't have that at the moment. I have more US national trend line data. So that kind of highlights some of these critical areas going forward. But yeah.
I'm sorry.
Trustee
I didn't know
Moreno?
when we were able to ask questions or not.
Yes.
Oh, you can. Yes, please do. Great to see you.
Question I have, going back to your data for a minute,
Okay.
is I thought I saw, was California the highest decline of the United States, of the 50 states?
I only did a kind of a hodgepodge of data points, but I believe California is in the top tier of states that have lost students in this last 2 years.
I thought there was a chart that you had.
Yes, but those are just kind of a hodgepodge of states. So just kind of give you a reflection of regional differences. So for example, the other states we included was Massachusetts, Wisconsin, and Maryland.
So
That was an illustrative of all the states.
I see. The other question I have, I don't know if you have any data relative to California, how we perform.
Yes, so we can share this PowerPoint, Guadalupe and the Chancellor can share this with all of you. So there is data of like, the 2-year system and the 4-year and 2-year system in terms of the loss enrollment for community colleges, for all of higher education. So you can see, and there was like a 9-point loss of students for California.
Do you ever get any data on participation rates? That is, the LA district is probably serving the lowest participation rate. In other words, we have many more people available that don't come to us, that there are communities that are really dying for increased population, because that all comes into play as to whether or not we have a reservoir of students that have been untapped. We understand that also you might discuss the effects of this COVID subsidies of paying people basically to stay home, how that affects our enrollments now and in the future. But I think I'd like to know more about how we as a institution, especially in light of the fact we are serving such a large group of people in not only area but concentration, that our participation rate is so low, has been very low, is my understanding, for many years, that the opportunities are far greater for us to serve more students because they're more available. Any data on that participation rate?
Candidly, that would be something I don't think national data, especially LA data, would exist. I do think, many of our institutions, what they have done during this pandemic has done some campaigns to call students to figure out exactly what they're doing if they're not re-enrolling in the institution, to assess and kind of do a informal polling of whether or not childcare needs are prevalent, to why a student of a single mother, for example, is staying home because of the childcare needs, to a student who has chosen an occupation over going back to college. I think that is something of note. I would say, in terms of the slides that were above, I would say, and I talked about younger students, globally speaking, for our students, one of the things that we have seen is that we haven't seen as much slippage from the high school to college pipeline for our colleges, but we have seen significant slippage of students from adult workers, adult learners coming into our institutions and staying in our institutions. So that's a significant flag as we think about things and you do your programming.
Just one other item. One of the largest sources of students was the students who have been unsuccessful in going through our LA Unified system. We had one institution that I served at East LA College that had a 50% graduation rate, which means there's 50% of those students who are in need of other kinds of services, educational services. That is ironically perhaps a source that you want to look at it, it might be a source that we're not tapping because we have in the past, I might add. So, the participation rate is very, very important in knowing how we should be performing in the future. Anyways, thank you.
Well, those are great points and great data metric on the high schools that are feeding into the institutions. So additional population changes that I would just note, as I mentioned, in 2021, we had the lowest increase in percent change to the US population, starting from 1900 all the way to 2021, you saw a significant decline. You've seen some jumps, but for the most part, you've seen some declines, especially in years where the United States was in, World War I. You see right by near 2020, the World War II in the 30s and 40s. And obviously 2021 has been a significant year for us in terms of births and also deaths. So next slide. And that kind of manifests itself in this, in the declining birth rates. So what you will see here is the birth rate is that top line near that 1.2 on your left, and declines over time. And you'll see a dip again from 2020 to 2021. I would also just note that that orange line, which is deaths, which has been typically between 0.6 and 0.8% as a population change. It is over almost 1% now in 2021, and obviously that has a direct reference relations to COVID-19. And then and see what that has made the population change just go further and further down. Okay. Next slide. I mentioned enrollment trends, workforce trends, and demographic trends, because one of the things that colleges, and I'm asking all colleges to think about, is like, what is your business model of the future as a district, business model for each of your institutions? There are a couple of things besides birth rates that will impact your enrollment going forward. For an example, colleges are doing dual enrollment programs. So that means that a certain percentage of your high school seniors will not actually be, spending 2 years, 3 years in your institution. They might be only spending 1 year in your institution, getting an associate degree and transferring. That will have a long-term systemic impact on your enrollment. We also do know that there is a significant opportunity, especially as it's playing out in California with, I believe there's a bill for bachelor's degree in nursing, for example, in California. You have your pilot program to do bachelor's degree. As many as community colleges do offer more and more baccalaureate degrees at institutions, that is an opportunity for additional growth of enrollment for your institutions, and that is clearly an opportunity for all of you. These next two slides, I would say, you know,
Sure. I have to chime in on that comment. As we begin to offer a bachelor's and master's degree in nursing, our nursing programs become less viable, less marketable, because if the demand is created that there be a bachelor's requirement and a master's requirement for the same discipline, then we're being moved out of the process of accumulating, at least at the community college level. You know, we have to be very careful. There is a false assumption that somehow we're going to be marketable. We're only a transitional experience for these students. So, you know, it's a two-edged sword here. As the degree requirement rises, our participation declines in some areas, especially the vocational side. So I tried to fight this battle for many years. I believe that our certificate programs at the community college level are equivalent to any of the programs, even a master's or a bachelor's degree, because they tend to be more academic in nature as opposed to training. So I'm not sure that's a positive. I think you need to be cognizant that as we begin to elevate the requirements, our participation becomes lower.
Well, I would say, at least specifically in nursing, I agree with you that there is a certain level of degree inflation that's occurring in the nursing field, especially for certain hospitals that are desiring nurses beyond an ASN to get a BSN into an MSN. I think one of the things that is an opportunity of growth for us as a sector, especially in the nursing and the home healthcare and other medical fields, is that you're seeing that play out in community after community. There is a significant decline in nurses globally across the United States. I think the healthcare sector, I think the retirements were, I saw this recently on nightly news, was like over 5 and 6% resignation rates. So that does provide an opportunity of growth for us as a sector. But I do agree that there is a certain level of degree inflation that is impacting our nursing programs specifically.
Mr. Lee, with regard to online, moving right before the pandemic, LACCD was 19% online. And I'm not sure, maybe the chancellor knows the exact percentage of where we're at online right now. But whatever it is, there's probably a 60%, increase from that. What's the effect of moving online that you've seen? This again, changes in college programming offering, right? So the online, individualized learning component that is occurring that was not foreseen to this level is in front of us, right? So we have to deal with that in a way that maybe we're uncomfortable with or weren't prepared for. What's your thought on that?
Well, that's a great question. What we're seeing in the communications that I've been getting from institutions is the following. As obviously colleges have moved to online in 2020, college students were forced to do online. And online has been beneficial to students, especially in the height of the pandemic and during the pandemic. But the enrollment hasn't bounced back per se for the online programs as much as hybrid programs and in-person programs. And that's where, the reality of this picture is that students prefer, you have to provide this option, and some students might prefer the online option, but students are also preferring to be in person, at least for a portion of their time. And that's where colleges are seeing growth. I don't know if the chancellor has data upon the increase, for example, for programs that are solely on in person versus solely hybrid or just online. But the general assessment that we've gotten from the field is if you're any component of in person, has seen an increase in enrollment, whether or not that's completely in person, hybrid, versus completely online.
Dr. Boland, may I respond?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Yeah, we are in the winter session right now. We're finishing that up, and where we began there was 88% online, 12 or so percent in person for our 5-week compressed calendar of courses. Our spring semester, which begins or February 7th, we slotted about 50-50, and it's currently 44% online, 6% hybrid, so about 50%, the other 50% in person on ground. But as we're seeing the enrollment trends, and we're monitoring this every day, multiple times during the day, the enrollments tend to be shifting towards preference to online and hybrid. So I would not be surprised that as February 7th rolls around and as the spring semester begins, that we are actually more, 60 to 65% online as a matter of fact, and then 35-40% in person. So it is shifting towards more preference student enrollments to online.
Okay. And that's, obviously that's also COVID related and how that plays out, but, where other parts of our country where, it's not playing as much, we are seeing the in-person attracting more students. In terms of additional competition, and this is something that's important for the broad conversation around higher education, is there are many more education and training providers in the mix. Obviously, the community colleges have been competing with the for-profit sector nationally and in urban areas like Los Angeles, but also nonprofit colleges. We are also seeing another category kind of playing in, and that is employers doing their own training of employees, either with their preferred vendor or actually just creating a program to do this educational work. So that's something to monitor, and it's an opportunity for it's an opportunity to increase your enrollment, but also be cognizant of who your competitors are. And I would just say, generally speaking, I always highlight one of our community colleges. It's in Tucson, Arizona. Tucson, Arizona is home to Pima Community College. I think Chancellor Lambert knows our president there, Lee Lambert. Lee is competing against not just ASU, which is Arizona State University. He's not just competing against them and their global campus that they just recently completed or created, but he is now competing against Southern New Hampshire universities, which is one of the largest online programs in our country. They have built a new Western headquarters in Tucson, Arizona. So that shows you kind of the competitive nature that is existing for many of our colleges and we are confronting with. But it does provide opportunities for us to offer programs that are locally based and work with employers to ensure students have the skills and education necessary for the workforce. So that is part of the 3 trend lines. Some of the things to think about going forward as a district. Next slide, please, Guadalupe. Next thing to think about, as colleges and districts, sustainable resource and business models are going to be important and part of that conversation. Renewing of public investment and public trust. I would note that this pandemic period, when we first started in 2020 in March, we had significant concerns about the state coffers and the ability of the state to maintain funding levels for higher education. I would say that California has done relatively well with its state investment, and I hear more investment is coming down the road for community colleges. And that was one of the top priorities for us as a sector in Washington, D.C., or excuse me, as an organization, to ensure that states were adequately funded and also community colleges and institutions receive money through the stimulus legislation. The other thing is obviously what drives most of this conversation, and especially drove the comments, is student enrollment. How do we increase that? And lastly is just educational and workforce relevance. And that's from creating traditional programs that lead to transfer, working on those relationships with your four-year public sector partners, to creating creating relationships with other business entities to create programs that lead to apprenticeships, internships, or directly into a position at some point in time. That is, I believe, is almost my last slide. Some things for college trustees they should do. Just as a reminder for all things, this is kind of a reminder slide, understanding the special fiduciary responsibilities of the board, maintaining strong board CEO relationships, that equals a strong institution, effective advocacy equals secured public funding. And I do want to thank the board for its advocacy around some of these key areas. I have worked with a number of all of you. And when you were joined us and have answered our advocacy grassroots alerts, thank you again for your participation on that, because that helps us move resources to your students and to institutions, adapting institution and curricula to meet emerging needs, and community engagement leads to increased enrollment and persistence. So that ends this PowerPoint presentation. If there are any other additional questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Board members?
President Buena.
Yes, Trustee Bennett.
So I think for me, thank you so much. This is amazing. I love the presentation. I guess for me, like, should we be really looking at a very comprehensive survey? Since we serve so many students, it just seems really, at least to me, important to really know what our students are going through right now and what they're thinking in order to govern well. And that's really, I'm not talking about a little survey, I'm talking about, a district-wide survey of our students. Anyway, what do you think about that?
Well, I would say, I think student surveys are beneficial. I do want to thank the LA Community College District. I believe in 2016, ACCT, along with the Hope Center, which was did a comprehensive basic needs study. You were one of our pilot colleges as part of 74 institutions across this country, and your data helped inform some of the stuff that just transpired. For example, the Department of Education is providing almost $200 million for basic needs. So nice. I think any data helps inform process and the work that you do as an organization, and also will help create and list your priorities within your institution.
Thank you so much.
I'm just going to go down the line. Trustee Moreno, anything?
I just, I do have a comment and also maybe a question. We always use the word we should discuss or think about or deal with, but we need some more action plans as opposed to further discussion. I think what we're trying to lead, I think the issue of a questionnaire, we have to not only survey our students, which we should do, we need to find a way of surveying the people who don't come to us. And that's the problem. The problem is the students who are coming to us are there because they found their way into our system. Those who have not come to us, we need to find out why they're not coming, because they used to come to us, now they're not coming. So I'm in favor of some kind of survey that has its goal is discovering why the devil they're not coming to us now. And I also want to point out again the issue I had raised earlier. We do have somehow a natural need to increase our participation in education to include bachelor's and master's degree. Given half a chance, the community colleges would all move towards that end. The problem with that is that takes us out of the mix of being competitors. we serve a very special need. And far too frequently, as we've been to, we take great pride in our bachelor's programs as though they're the end of our existence. The reality is that we serve that that area that many people need today in terms of vocational education. And I think that we need to be cognizant that as a primary goal. We all celebrate the bachelor's programs, but I think we need to be aware that we should have a program that has as its goal marketable skills at the end of the educational experience. I don't know whether I'm going to get much traction on that issue, but I can assure you after 50 years, I take great pride in being a member of the community colleges. I don't have to assume that I want to become a member of a four-year institution. I think our success stands on its own. Anyways, that's my comment. Thank you.
Trustee Bettis?
There's honestly a number of thoughts, because we're sort of ending, our evaluation for last year. We're talking about trends. And I think we have a subsequent process to talk about this coming year's goals. But I'm going to speak from this perspective of, one of the things that's not like sort of a good presence on this board are trustees who know sort of the private sector hiring, where jobs are going right now, and how competitive it is. And I work in the public sector, and hiring is really just challenging right now because there's a lot of competition. There's some level of flightiness, only because there's I've never seen a world where like there's an incentive hiring process like the way we are. And I think we all went into this COVID conversation believing things were going to be tough. And sometimes when things get tough, just like I think we might have been prepping for a return to colleges to a certain extent, having to adjust to the online features, but we've adjusted to the online features and the remote learning features, but not have adjusted to a labor market that's shrinking, right? I think we just heard the president talk about, sub 4% unemployment, but it's unemployment where there's, the private sector is adjusting with bonus hires, which I haven't seen on the lower sector in a really long time. It's certainly there in the mid sector, and it's certainly there in some of the higher sectors. But we just don't, it's just something that we're confronting now with, you saw it in the Amazon jobs, a $3,000 bonus. You saw it on some of the lifting wages. And if we do, I'll use a comparison, and it's a program that we all support on this call, and we all think it's vital to our society, our childcare program. We do a childcare certificate, and sometimes they're coming out not making what's been posted on those two simple, massive sites, Amazon and Costco. So, from looking at that, and I think, trying to understand enrollment trends, it is interesting to see the younger group there. I know a couple of us have kids college level, and I have one who spends her summers in community colleges, and we talk about that fiscal piece very carefully, because the worst thing is, at least in our mind, is to get out of college with debt. It's something at least we've learned from that debt education issue. But the reality is of the choices in front, there's part-time employment that's just easy right now. So I'm going to say this from like West LA College. It was very interesting to hear our president there give a presentation this past year where that was our school that led in distance learning and offered something that others didn't. And when we went to all remote, everybody offered it. It's kind of probably the same issue of Calbright in California, where it was supposed to be the online education, and now we all do it. So you ask yourself the question, like, what is going to distinguish you from others? And I'd be curious to get your feedback here on the private sector. And I've had a chance to tour ASU's, facility in Los Angeles, New Hampshire. Both they both are phenomenal marketing entities. New Hampshire in particular, it's like Grand Canyon, all them. They just, what they put out in images, it's just beautiful. It looks like you just need it. You want to be there because it's fun and because it's going to be worthwhile in the end. But they've adopted to understanding that there's a tremendous amount of marketing needs. But how is it that, with all the debt education that I think we've all engaged in, that there's still growth there? And sometimes I wonder if it's just purely the flexibility of building the whole experience around the student, and that's what we haven't done well in the public sector, or is there something I'm missing? Because it's certainly not cheaper,
Yes.
but it's marketed really well, and it's built around an individual, as opposed to we're building around a structure and a system, and we're following contracts, and certainly we also are dealing with a workforce that has more strength and less and more negotiations in terms of getting to a different process.
I would say the following. The for-profit sector and the nonprofit global partners, they do great jobs of marketing their institutions. They spend enormous amount of money on marketing their institutions. You have to give them kudos for that. I think, as a sector, and I'll talk specifically about California because I'm originally from California. I still think of myself as a Californian, and most of my family is still in California. California has a master plan for higher education, but I would say California hasn't done a great job of marketing its institutions to its students. I will give you an example, and I know Trustee Hoffman knows this because she works in the financial aid sector. You cannot tell a student you can come free to a community college as long as because you can get a BOG waiver. No one knows what a BOG waiver is. It is not a vernacular that is subtle or unique. It's known wide across the state. So using vernaculars, especially for first gen, second gen students, immigrant students, that's one of the reasons why we strongly supported free community college. The context of free community college is easy to understand. And so when you watch these ads, they'll broadcast two things. One, we'll give you free hardware if you come. If you want a laptop, we'll give you a laptop. Number two, you can go at your own pacing. Okay. Well, that's the reality of most students. They go at their own pacing. They sign up for courses, 2 courses, 3 courses, 1 courses. And the other thing is that the ease of use, they can come online, they can come in person. So many of the things your institutions are already doing, they just do a better marketing campaign for it. But also we as a sector, we're too fixated on terminologies and around some of these key things. And that was always my complaint to all of you in California, is like, why can't we just tell students that if you make under blank thousands of dollars, you get free tuition in California? Or actually, it's not tuition, it's fees. You get free fees in California. So those are things that, it could be a slogan, it could be a number of things, but these are some easy ways to increase enrollment in your institution.
Thank you. Trustee Hoffman?
Thank you, Chair Buelna, and thank you, Jihang. That was a great presentation. And I agree with you. I also feel like California community colleges are not quick to adapt to change, and LACCD is no different. And so I feel like we are in a rapidly changing higher education environment, and we don't adapt well, and we don't adapt fast enough. We're always, a few steps behind. I also think that, and Trustee Veras, I never thought about it this way before, but most of us on the board do work in the public sector or nonprofit sector. We're not working in the private sector. And we need to know, in addition to surveying, if we go that route, our students, I think we do need to work with our workforce partners to find out what is it that they're looking for. I have kids who are already out of college and working, and my daughter hires. Looking at a college degree is not the number one criteria anymore. It's the training, it's the education, it's the knowledge and skills and abilities, not necessarily that degree. And so how are we adapting our programs to meet the workforce needs of right now? So I think that's really important. And then, we have this online college, Calbright, that was supposed to capture these sort of stranded workers. We should be looking at those stranded workers, those folks who are in low-level, mid-level jobs, who never did complete their education. And that might be the new population that we have to recruit from, because like you said, the high school graduation rates are, birth rates are going down, and recruiting high school students may not be our only viable way to grow and increase enrollment. So those are just some thoughts off the top of my head. And one last plug for student parents, and I know Jihang, you know this, we really need to do a better job of providing a safety net and support system for student parents, so that they know that they're welcome in our colleges and that they'll be successful, and we can provide enough financial aid so they can get through. Thanks.
And just a plug, LA Valley did a presentation at our college, or ACCT Congress, and Angel was, right? It's Angel, right?
Amber Angel, yeah.
Amber Angel is,
Yep.
was our student speaker at our last, our 2020 Congress, which was virtual. So
Yeah, and you will see them again, probably in Sacramento. I think they're presenting remotely along with Pam Lester. So,
okay,
thanks.
great.
Trustee Henderson?
Thank you, Trustee Brona. I will not repeat what everyone else has said. I'm in complete agreement. But I would like to thank you, Jihang, for the presentation and for the information. I have been taking copious notes to myself of, things that I feel that as a board, we could start to move forward on. And this is always a great opportunity to not just evaluate and think about how we'll evaluate our chancellor, but think about how we evaluate ourselves, literally self-evaluation. And I agree with Trustee Hoffman. I think that the more we focus on our students' needs, especially our student parents, I think the better off we will be in terms of how we make that broad connection between our workforce development and non-credit and our credit programs. So I look forward to the work that this board will be doing over this next 2 years, especially in regards to meeting these board goals, and not just solely make it the responsibility of our chancellor to meet them, but for all of us to make sure that we're in partnership. So thank you again for the presentation.
Thank you.
Trustee Fong?
Thank you so much, President Bona, and thank you, Jihang, for the great presentation. I really appreciate the demographic, the information, and all the deep dive into the various numbers and issues. And to follow up on a number of my colleagues' comments, I think a survey of our students, but also Trustee Hoffman and Trustee Bella referenced it, but a survey of our business community as well, and looking at our vocational workforce, CTE training programs. I think you kind of hit on a dot earlier. We got to make sure that we're meeting the needs of industry in terms of our short-term 6-month, 9-month training programs, and that opportunity cost as well for students to come and attend our colleges. So I think looking at the upcoming Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act reauthorization and continue to amplify the community college partnerships that are part of that agreement and that legislation on the federal level. And as more resources come from state and federal government in terms of the workforce training programs, I think our colleges and our district needs to really be ready to meet that moment. And so I just want to put out here as well, I know workforce training, CT training programs, and strong workforce funds. And I think we need to really continue to amplify those efforts. And I think that's an area of opportunity as well. So I know the Chancellor chairs our LA Orange County Regional Consortium as well. But as we look at building those partnerships here at each of our 9 colleges, I really want to make sure that we're continuing to amplify and to boost those training efforts. So thank you so much, Chair Buona, and thank you so much, colleagues, for the robust presentation.
I'm going to do a quick round robin before I make comments. Then Chancellor Rodriguez, if you'd like to make a comment as well. Any other comments?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that I do like the idea of going outside as well with the survey and serving the community. Thank you.
Chancellor Rodriguez, I actually invite you to make your comment, then I'll go after you.
Okay, thank you, Board President Buona, members of the board. First, we thank you all for joining us this Saturday morning. This is the 3rd time the board has met this week on a variety of very important issues, and I want to commend you all for spending the amount of time interest, talent, and energy towards providing exceptional leadership to our district. So thank you all for that. I want to commend you all and thank you on behalf of our executive staff and colleges. Next, Jihang Lee, wonderful job today. We'll have some follow-up to do, clearly. The results for us, Board President Bolna, members of the board, of your self-evaluation, we're going to comb those very carefully. Those are very, very instructive to us by way of communication, by way of demonstrating the interests of the board, and making sure that we are providing you good, timely, accurate information on a variety of subjects that you find to be your goals and your interests. So for me, I also, similar to Trustee Henderson, have taken copious notes, and we will follow up with the board president and others to follow you. But just thank you very much. It's been incredibly instructive, insightful, and really does foreshadow, I think, Trustee Vet, as you mentioned, what we push over, continue for 2022. This is a great running start for that. We're doing this work concurrently as we close out 2021, identify, applaud the areas where we did well, and clearly work on the areas that we need to improve. So very instructive day. Thank you all for your time and attention.
One more, I'll do one more time. Any other comments from the board before I make comments? Okay. Then President, Mr. Lee, if you'd like to make comments after mine, and after I make comments, any other board member before we close out. Want to make sure no board member thinks that they haven't been heard. I think it's always important to remember that as the Board of Trustees, we're elected by the public, and that we represent one of the most robust areas of the country. So when we do this assessment, we do it on behalf of the public. We don't do it on behalf of our own personal interests, solely of the institution, but how, as members of an elected body, we represent the district, and not just the district, but the community at large, in their naming of us of community colleges. And that's a bigger mandate than any one goal, than any one thing, because our job is also to represent those entities or those groups, those individuals that don't have access or are not represented well in what we're doing. So sometimes our comments might be in conflict with some of those who are employed within our district, because sometimes our goals might not be the same as we represent different components. And trustees may disagree on that, and that's fine. I think Trustee Moreno, made a comment with regard to, the survey of those who are not coming to the institution. So one of the things that, and I've been a trustee now for 5 years, that I've observed is that the institution does not do well with change. And once we do let's say if we do a comprehensive survey, we do have to figure out how as a board we evaluate the process of dealing with change as a district. We are we're a West Coast institution. We're not an East Coast institution where a lot of policy occurs. So as we move forward and as I close this, there are a lot of decisions to be made in the next few months and activities, and also pushing the institutions that represent us in the different policy entities. So with that, President Lee, if you'd like to make any other comments, and then any other board member, just quick comments, and we can close out.
Well, I just want to thank the board for giving me this opportunity to present to all of you and spending some hours on the West Coast in the morning. I would just highlight that, the work that our association does in concert with its member colleges like LACCD is basically in concert to the guest of Trustee Henderson. It's the work of our, children across this country, of our, the students that we represent and fight every day for and educate every day for. It's a lot of work. but I want to thank all the board members for standing for office, running for election. I know it can be a little complicated at some times to run for office, but also, as the chancellor mentioned, it's not for the faint of heart, and it takes time commitment. And I want to thank you for doing all that work. I'm hopeful to see all of you in Sacramento or in Washington, D.C. And I would just note that Trustee Fong mentioned a couple pieces of legislation where LA community college districts can have some sway and provide some guidance on, for example, the reauthorization of the Workforce Investment Act, or things like, for example, called Perkins CTE Act. So there's a number of opportunities for us to work together in concert around advocacy items. But thank you again for the invitation, the opportunity to do the BSA and to present today. So that will be the end of my comments for today. Thank you so much.
Trustees, any final comments before we adjourn? 3, 2, seeing none, we will officially adjourn this session. Have a good rest of the rest of your Saturday, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good Saturday.